Hi, this is Mark News from Plant Talk Radio. Thanks for subscribing and listening to our Plant of the Week podcast, brought to you by Bonide Products, family made in America. Visit Bonide.com to find a retailer near you. Each week, Plant Talk Radio's Fred Hauer focuses on a plant that would be a great addition to your landscape. Now for this week's Bonide Products Plant of the Week. Fred, the caller brought up one of your favorite plants and one of mine as well, the coral bell.
Yep, coral bell is an interesting plant. I have put them in spots where they just don't flourish, and I've learned not to fool with them. If they've told you on one planting they're not going to work there, go elsewhere. But they will grow in a great number of places, neither bone dry nor sloppy wet. And then I think overall, just speaking of coral bell, they are best in morning sun, or they are also very good in no direct sun, no direct hot light, because their leaves are on the fragile side. But they're one of those plants that has been selected by the breeders over the last 15 or 20 years, where we had green coral bell, and then we had a plant that's kind of a cross into the coral bell group called heuchera. Other types of heuchera, and then heucherella by technical name. But these are plants that the breeders have gotten a hold of, and now we have at least 3 shades of dark burgundy. We have untold greens that from darker to a little mottled to a lighter. Then as lighter goes, we go into chartreuse in in leaf color and so on, to the extent that certainly in a flower bed, you want flowers. But it's a plant of many possibilities. They grow very well in containers, especially if you don't let the container go too dry. They will hang down over the edge a little bit. Now, they're not a trailing plant per se, at least not the ones I know of, in the sense of flopping over and going out across the ground. But they are part of what we can use as the richness of containers, as you mentioned, Jim talked about last week. They offer various flower heights and sizes, all of which are attractive. But then the foliage can be, I think I've seen them at least 4 inches in diameter. Most are in the 2.5 to 3 inch diameter. And then as long as they are being watered properly and so on, the foliage will be, I think, the outstanding thing over the course of a summer. And I think this is extremely important that as I drive around Columbus, there's very little area open for weeds even. Condos and apartments, humongous runs of them, many of which have a balcony, and most of those balconies have a pot, a flower, a whatever on them. Right. Or you get into shopping centers and so on. The coral bells make up a good bit of the big containers, and I mean big. They're 2.5, 3 feet high, 3.5 feet across, and add to the life of a shopping center area. If you're not watching, you walk into one and it catches you mid-thigh, you'll know you were there on that hard concrete edge or whatever. But at the same time, they personify, the people, however you want to say it, they make the area less harsh architecturally.
Yeah.
And the container sizes and colors can be interesting. And then the flowers in them are many tropicals, and then many of the things such as the coral bell that will work in our gardens or our containers. So it's really what I'm going to call a handy little plant. One of the things that I have found in my own garden, and by happenstance and being forced into it by Mother Nature, coral bell will grow upon itself to the extent that eventually 3 years or more later, it's kind of laying on the top of the soil. And if that's the case, where it will be rooted at that same time, that'll probably be its last year. So what you want to do is, where many perennials, it is recommended that you lift and divide them every 3 or so years. I would say on coral bell, every 2 to 3 years. Lift them, divide them, because you can frequently find stems with roots, call it on each side. You can cut them with a sharp hand shear, whatever, and plant them back in the ground, not deep, but back down in the ground where they'll stay moist. Because as soon as they lay on the top, we get into a dry summer, and where they don't like heat as well in the first place. They can make it their last year. But I find them very handy for garden and container and handling a good bit of shade. I wouldn't put them in a dark corner, but at the same time, I wouldn't put them in the southwest-facing sun either.
Well, they do have a pretty little flower, but it's really all about the foliage, isn't it? It's much like a hosta.
Yes, that's right. And at the same time, when we come to thinking about the return of the hummingbird, they'll go after the coral bell like crazy.
Thanks again for listening to our podcast, brought to you by Bonide Products at Bonide.com. Plant Talk Radio offers other podcasts as well, including our daily Your Gardening Question podcast and our weekly Plant Talk Radio, all available on iTunes or your preferred podcast player. If you have a plant suggestion for Fred, send him an email, fred@planttalkradio.com.